Growing calls to transform the banking sector. They vary from demands for the creation of black-owned commercial banks to a government takeover of the Reserve Bank. But has the VBS scandal put a dampener on the transformation agenda? ANC MP Nathi Hleko raised the concern that VBS's failure is being viewed as a black failure.
There is a trend that this failure particularly seems to be the kind of failure that needs to prove a point against Africans and black people in general.
And the push to transform the banking sector, which is currently dominated by the 5 major commercial banks, continues. Are the fears justified that tinkering with a stable, world-respected banking system would be disastrous? To discuss this issue, we have in the studio Yunus Karim, Chair of Parliament's Finance Committee, and Andile Nomlala, President of the Black Management Forum. Very good to have both of you with us. Let me start off with you, Yunus Karim. Is that how this has been seen, as a black failure?
Well, that's one of the many reasons why our committee has been of the view that as far as possible, if VBS can be rescued, it should be. Well, I mean, it serves to, in effect, reinforce racial stereotypes that Africans in particular are not capable of running institutions and businesses, particularly in the financial sector. And it sort of also reinforces cultural and racial stereotypes that African people are inherently corrupt. Yet the main victims of the irregularities at VBS are African people themselves, the poor and the low-income earners and the pensioners and the like. But our argument for rescuing this bank or looking into the possibility of a similar mutual bank in the same area under new leadership, obviously, is not based simply on that. We think that the failure of VBS Mutual is a severe setback for diversification and transformation of the financial sector. In fact, last year, we had the most extensive public hearings held since 1994 on financial sector transformation. And we produced a 130-page report, which was adopted by the National Assembly last November, and is the basis around which NEDLAC is processing the preparations for a financial sector summit, which is something we'd like to see in the first quarter of next year, certainly before the end of this 5th term of Parliament. In fact, in our budget review report some 2 weeks ago, we once again urged Treasury and the Presidency to consider having this financial sector summit where both the emergent or emerging entrepreneurs in the financial sector and those who are the established big banks and other financial institutions can engage further and find some degree of compromise.
Okay, we can talk about that summit a little bit more, but what sort of failure should this be seen as? And if it's called, like the Nathi said, as a black failure, does that just stigmatize it to the point that you can't actually move on from it?
Good evening, Jen, and good evening to your viewers. I think we're drawing parallels to a transformation agenda and to a clear, plain sight corruption situation are not something that I can even speak about. There's no such a thing as a black failure when an honest and a separate bank like VBS just goes under through a clean, plain sight corruption. Remember, by the way, if you go back into the past, there's many black professionals, excellent professionals, one of them being the former president of BMF, Wiseman Guhlu, who ran a company called MIG Bank in Mthatha, which was a very successful black-owned bank. The entire Bantustan governments in the past ran successful banks. So you don't want to draw a similarity on an open-sided, clear, plain corruption to transformation. Transformation has nothing to do with individuals that gets corrupt. The fact that they are black or white
comments, how does it impact on setting up another black-owned bank?
No, look, there are many black professionals, by the way, even in the established banking sector that you called as a world-renowned, who have done sterling job. You could take it from Sizwe Ngasana, who grow the shareholder value of Old Mutual to multiples that have not even been realized by the current white CEO at FNB. There are many other top black professionals in Standard Bank. You have them at Nedbank, even at Upside in some instance. So there's a reality that we can run black banks. and we want to run black banks. BNF stands firmly on supporting an idea where we can open more mutual banks, even other commercial banks that can be run by black professionals who have the necessary skills, who have the necessary expertise, and we have them in the country. So one who wants to draw a one-sided situation about VBS and link it to blackness, anything that is corrupt can't be just seen as being black. It's individuals, and they must be isolated, and they must be taken to task for their own corruption. But the reality is that government, from the legislation point of view, must create an enabling environment that black people can run black banks in the country.
Okay, Eunice, so clearly that sort of description needs to be shelved if anyone's going to move on. Eunice, we've been hearing about the level of talent that there is out there. What does South Africa do now with that talent to make it more progressive and, as you say, to fit into the scenario of transformation?
Well, I agree with my colleague from the BEF in everything he said. We have also raised this issue that it should not be reduced to one of color and race. That actually, if we look at Lesetja Kanyako, the governor of the Reserve Bank, or Minister Tito Mboweni, or the former minister Nhlanhla Nene, where do they come from if not communities like the ones in the Vemba area? Now, we have in our financial sector transformation report stressed the need for greater flexibility in applying regulations in respect of the formation of banks, but in a way that also ensures that the depositors and policyholders in the case of insurance agencies do not lose out. So you can find the right balances. We're saying that there should be lighter regulation when it comes to smaller and mutual banks. And why we feel that VBS collapse is in a sense quite a severe setback is also because we understood that banks would graduate. You're a mutual bank and then you grow in experience, and as you expand and acquire a bigger market base, then you apply for a license to become a commercial bank and the like. We would like to see a far more diversified financial sector where there's a variety of different forms of banks. Now, what encourages also us is that, you know,
we're not because we've got a call on the lines.
banking.
Excuse me, jumping in. Who wants to ask either one of you a question? Bernard from Protea Glen, go ahead, please.
Good day, how are you?
Good evening.
Yes. I have a question regarding the bank issue. You know, the fact that VPS was a black-owned bank and there were shenanigans that happened in the bank, it does not mean or say that all black people are corrupt. You know, that perspective needs to change. We really need a black-owned bank in South Africa owned by black people. It can't be that every time we as black people, we own something, then the masters must come in and make sure that they destroy that. There was ANN7, which was a black-owned company. Where is it today? You know, what happened to ANN7 was solely because it was a black-owned company and it was coming in the media space where white people are at play. Now, we can't be every time that we as black people try to do something, then there must be some question marks around that. Yes, with the VPS saga, some wrong things happened, but the Reserve Bank needs to come in and rescue, like the same thing that was done with African Bank. African Bank had some problems in some times. Then the Reserve Bank had to come in and bail African Bank. The same thing must happen with VPS. Like, honestly, it's old people that were banking there. Currently, some of them, they can't even bury their own people. So my plea
victims.
for the Reserve
Thank you for
Bank.
that. Let me put that to Andile. What do you make of his comments and suggestion of the role of the Reserve Bank there?
Look, I didn't get, he was not amplified well, but the reality, I did capture some of his points. The reality here is that if you talk transformation, you must talk transformation that is progressive and is linking towards what the demographics of the country are looking like. And at this present moment, we can't have an environment where the picture of bank business, and particularly at the executive level, is leaning towards white executives. We've seen something that has been done by ABSA recently that we're very unhappy about, appointing 2 top executives, and that are white males who are even at the edge of their retirement, whilst there was a perfect opportunity for them to bring up top black talent within their ranks or even outside. So
why do you think that's not happening? I mean, where should the pressure be coming from?
Look, the pressure as BMF now, by the way, we're standing on a very firm position that very soon we're going to go and take these matters on a litigation base. We start, first of all, to tighten up our legislation, because the legislative framework we have and the regulatory framework we have is not yielding the necessary results that we want to see. So if now this transformation that is law, employment equity, affirmative action and BEE is not giving us what we want, then the only option we have is to take it on a test case-by-case basis to law and see what would come out of it, because people are taking decisions that are outside law. If you are not taking decisions that are pro-transformation, it means you are not obliging to the country's law on transformation. Okay. So for us, we've moved on the state of talking and writing press statements.
Hold on, before I come back to you on that, Eunice, then we'll pick up on that further. Tandile from Germiston is on the line. She wants to ask, how long is it going to take for banks to transform? Go ahead, Tandile.
Hi, ma'am. How are you?
Hello, good evening.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, ma'am. I was watching this thing for VPS. And then this thing is making me angry because of it's destroying our black people. As the black people, they don't do anything. They don't do transformation. If you can see these politicians, they hit that bank. They take the money for the poor people. Now they blame. We are blaming the black people. These banks, ABSA, whatever, those banks, the white people, they don't help us as the black people. That bank was the right bank for us as the black people. But the people, the politicians, they destroyed that bank. So I'm very, very, very angry about the VPS bank. Because those poor people were sleeping there in Venda there. They saved our money. We are trying to survive here in the location. We don't get help in these banks. That bank was the right bank for the black people. I'm very, very angry about the politicians who take the money for the poor.
Okay, thank you for that, Tandile. Eunice, what do you make of those comments, and how are we when it comes to improving oversight of banks?
Yes, well, firstly, can I just draw attention to the fact that almost all the banks that have fallen before VBS, Sambo, and then African Bank in a limited way, it was white executives and shareholders and managers that were responsible. So I think that insofar as people are interpreting this in racial terms, it's just absolute nonsense, right? It's really something that, you know, in our racialized society we can't afford, which is why we keep saying,
Put
in fact, the president
and move on. Let's look at the
said,
transformation and the oversight that's needed now.
All right, fine. What can be done, right? So there are various things. Do you want me to speak on what can be done?
Yes.
Yes, well, very quickly, as I said, we want lighter regulation without sacrificing the needs and interests of policyholders and depositors in the financial institutions. We feel that the digital banking is a way to open the space for African entrepreneurs, because you don't need bricks and mortar, and anybody who has a basic cell phone can actually transact financially. We feel that it's not just the banks, but the financial institutions to which the banks are linked, the insurance company, the asset managers, and so on. All of them need to ensure greater representativity. We say let's have the Financial Sector Summit in the first quarter of next year. We're saying that the Financial Sector Charter Council should ensure that the charter process is more precise in measuring exactly progress in this regard. We have urged that the CEOs of the major banks participate more actively in the Financial Sector Charter Council, and we have a litany of something like 61 recommendations in our Financial Sector Transformation Report. We're not saying they should all be done overnight. We're saying out of that, it's not a shopping list. We can develop a strategy, a phase in short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, and that's what we're pursuing. We are very clear that we have to transform the sector. It's long overdue. Yes, there's been some transformation, but nowhere near what is required. And the BMF should also put pressure, I think, as must other organizations, to ensure that this financial sector summit occurs. We've just had an investment conference that was very successful 2 Fridays ago. Now let's build on that.
Okay. Amma from Durban is calling us. Go ahead, Amma.
Good evening. I just wanted to know, should the bank be rescued? Wouldn't there be a run on the bank and it would just return the bank to 0.0 again? I'd like some comment from the panel.
Yes?
Yes.
Look, if there is anything to be salvaged there, it must be salvaged, but the people that are responsible for the pillage must be taken to account or to task. And the other thing, I think we must disabuse ourselves with this thing of VPS being linked to the bank, to blacks and everything else. I don't know of any blacks that are incompetent and who are corrupt. And
I guess the question as well is, how do you attract investors back to a bank like VBS?
No, you don't have to. If there's no business case to salvage VBS, we must let VBS perish and save the monies of the poor that were there. And that is the responsibility of both the state and the regulator that was supposed to have played part in preventing what has happened, which is the South African Reserve Bank. On the issue of transformation, I'm surprised that my learned colleague from Parliament could have a wish list whilst they are government. What we want is practical solutions, and the practical solutions lies on the legislation. You must legislate. If people are not willing to transform on their own conscience, then you must hold them accountable through law. Regulation and legislation must be the pillars of what we need to succeed as this country, because people are not voluntarily doing these things. And for ANC to have a wish list as if they are not a governing party is quite surprising.
It's too late, isn't it?
As black professionals, we're completely tired of the situation, and we will take even the ANC, for that matter, by the way, to court if the certain laws that they are putting are not yielding us the results that we want.
What's your response to that, Eunice? And obviously, it's important to get it done now, considering how many people are on the fringes of the banking sector not getting involved.
No, I'm very clear. It's not a wish list. I said it's not a shopping list. It's a very clear, precise set of 61 recommendations to the National Treasury and to government as a whole. And I'm saying that you can't implement all 61 overnight. So it's no shopping list. In fact, what we're calling for is exactly what my colleague from BMF is saying. There's no difference between what he's saying and what I'm saying. Though what we stress is transformation in the financial sector is more than just deracialization. It also must ensure financial inclusion. It must ensure that the services that are required by the people on the ground are delivered and so on. So it's a different way of serving the unbanked and the excluded for now. We're also very clear that the financial transformation process should serve primarily the poor and disadvantaged, but should also simultaneously create space for the African entrepreneurs that are emerging in the sector to grow. And he's right. The Reserve Bank, the private sector, and the state should work together to revive a bank in that area and elsewhere, of the sort that VBS was. You can call it SVB or whatever. Furthermore, the minister himself, Tito Mboweni, in the House 2 weeks ago, as I understood what he said precisely that while this bank may not be able to be rescued, and maybe stressed repeatedly, we've done this in the public domain. We called in the Hawks yesterday, and the NPA, and the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors, and the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, who are precisely dealing with the wrongdoers who are alleged to have looted this bank. We've asked the Hawks to act decisively, and we've also said to the Regulatory Board for Auditors to do so.
Let me bring in another caller, and then I'll come to you. Mozen from Port Elizabeth wants to comment about trading agreements among the banks. What's your question around that, Mozen?
Yes, good evening to the panel. I have a huge concern. You see, the banking sector is having a responsibility of reviewing trading terms between banks. For example, we cannot operate banks with the same trading terms of 150 ago, because if you look at the economy at this time, especially in South Africa, it is very vulnerable. And at the same time, are we still operating with the policies of years ago, regulating the banks with the same policies of years ago? Because these things are making other new bank specialists, I don't want to say black, but new people in the banking sector, difficult to enter in the banking sector because of difficult policies, of terrible trading policies that are making disastrous, scenario in the VBS matter.
Okay.
Are you, especially the BMS guys, are you guys attending to the trading agreements between banks, the government, and all the necessary stakeholders? That's the question. And policy.
Thank you for that.
Look, just to answer him, that's where I'm coming on with the regulatory framework, because some of these things are tied up at a regulatory level, the NCR policy, the FSP policy, and all of those things. So if you don't look at them with the end goal of where you want to go, then you're going to be caught up in all these situations that you find. In the BMF, for instance, we talk about three-tier transformation when we're talking the banking sector. We're talking the transformation at the employment equity level, including ownership. We're talking transformation, which is very critical in our days. The banks must be held accountable on which people do they fund when it comes to loans for particularly businesses. Because now, at this present moment, when you go everywhere in the country, black entrepreneurs feel that they don't have access. Even those entrepreneurs.
And they are so crucial to our economy.
Yes, and they are the pillar. If you talk small businesses, they are the pillar of the development that we want to see. But if they don't have quick finance and at an efficient rate that the banks does as versus the developmental financial institutions, then you're going to have a stagnation in our economy. And in some instances, banks don't extend credit to entrepreneurs that have purchase orders that are for government, which is most likely that they're going to be paid. We look at that. And the third pillar is what we spoke about earlier, the issue of assets that are under management of banks. Where do they make those investments? Which businesses that are they extending funding, equity positions, and everything else. And that is the position that BMF wants to look at. And we're not going to contest it via press statements and other things. We are professionals. We have amongst our members banking professionals who can tell us exactly what is going on inside there. And we form up a team of legal professionals within our midst who would then go challenge these frameworks.
Okay.
That's where we are.
We've heard about your challenge. Andile Nomlala, thank you very much. And Yunus Karim, it seems a lot more transformation needs to be done and to make it more competitive for those getting in. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Still ahead, we look at what's behind politicians bullying journalists here and abroad. Let's get into that after the break.